Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's briefing at the Jerusalem Press Club. My name is Talia Dekel-Fleissig. We are now over 200 days into the war, with active fronts both in Gaza and the north, 133 hostages still in captivity, rocket fire on Israeli towns, tens of thousands of civilians still displaced, and a new reality of a direct confrontation with Iran. The Wall Street Journal also claims that the IDF is employing wartime tactics in refugee camps in the West Bank. With us to decipher the current situation and perhaps provide some insight on the coming days is Dr. Eyal Hulata, Israel's most recent national security advisor and head of the National Security Council at the Prime Minister's office. Today, a visiting fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Hulata.
Thank you, Talia. Hello, everyone. It's been a while since we've done these briefings. I will try to follow the same format we did before. I will start with a brief description of the things I believe we should all pay attention to, and then we'll open the floor for questions, and I'd be happy to address the things that are on your mind. As I think Talia said well, the war in Gaza is still, of course, the main topic, but we have to address the Iranian issue, which has been, I would say, dramatic development in the course of events. But let's start with Gaza. I think the main things to look at is clearly the fact that it seems like Hamas is not really interested in a hostage deal, unfortunately, and that does not allow for a path for a ceasefire that I think everybody is looking for. Almost everybody is looking for. You're all stationed in Israel. I'm sure you're following. I think there's a growing majority of Israelis who understand the need to bring the hostages back before it's too late. The number of live hostages is on the decline by the day, by the week. And I think there's a strong sense that we're running out of time on behalf of on their sake for this. But of course, to have a deal, Hamas needs to agree, Sinwar needs to agree, and unfortunately, he does not feel that time is running out for him for a host of reasons. Part of it is militarily, of course, but I think a huge part of it is diplomatically. When Sinwar looks at what's happening and he sees the amount of pressure on Israel in the international community and the rise of the voices that are calling for ceasefire without a hostage deal, I'm sure that gives him encouragement. And in parallel to that, neither the Qataris nor the Egyptians, which hold the financial lifeline on the one hand and the physical lifeline on the other hand, are not pushing him to come to a deal and reach a ceasefire. So it seems, unfortunately, that Sinwar feels that he has room to maneuver. As long as that will be the case, I think we can't expect a hostage deal. In such a case, the only option that Israel has is to continue to pursue militarily. There are, I think, no other options. I think the Americans understand that. I believe that the European leaders understand that as well. And what we should expect in this regard to see in the coming weeks is the mobilization of the program to move the civilians from Rafah. It's not only civilians; it's also field hospitals and infrastructure that was built down in the south, moved elsewhere, and the IDF has a plan for that, so that they can create conditions that would allow them to operate in Rafah without endangering civilians in an unreasonable way. This will be, I think, the main thing to look at in the following weeks. Of course, to it is attached the importance of diplomatic collaboration with the Egyptians. This cannot happen while the Egyptians do not at least understand or acknowledge the need for that and do things on their part. The Egyptians are worried from day one that Gazans will cross through the border into Sinai and make this their problem, even though it could have been a very important humanitarian relief for the civilians of Gaza if they could temporarily move to Sinai. But President Sisi has refused to do this from day one. There will need to be some kind of coordination with them so that this doesn't damage the fragility of relationship as it is already at the moment. This is what we should look for, I think, in the context of Gaza. Um, Before I move to Lebanon, we have to talk about Iran because I think this is the major parameter that has changed dramatically over the last couple of weeks, and this will also have a direct impact on what happens in Lebanon with Hezbollah. The Iranian decision to attack Israel the way they did on April 13, I think came as a surprise to many in Israel and I think around the world. This was not, I think, what the Americans, as I understand it, felt based on the messaging that they delivered to the Iranians, which basically was President Biden's one word, don't. I think the Americans believed from the Iranian response through the various channels that there will be a symbolic retaliation attack on their behalf. What they fired on April 13 was nothing similar to symbolic. The only reason that only one Israeli child was injured was because Israel has very good air defense capabilities and very good partners in a coalition stretching from Israel eastwards almost all the way to Iran, with the Americans leading the Middle East Air Defense Coalition that was so effective. And that night, if we didn't have that, then immense number of I think casualties, damage in infrastructure in Israel, strategic sites, also in Jerusalem, would have been immense. We wouldn't be talking the way we are at the moment if this happened. This was the Iranian intent. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fired 300 or maybe even 500. I saw some reportings of projectiles, both ballistic, cruise, and drones towards Israel. This is unprecedented. No one has done that ever. And Iran did. That was an act of war. The reason Israel decided to respond the way it did comes a lot because we had an opportunity not to work and operate automatically, but to hopefully be a little bit more strategic, which is something that this government sometimes was able to do. And I think the war cabinet, with the composition, the unique composition it has at the moment, was very important to put some sense into the response, because Israel had an opportunity to operate according to its interests, strategic interests, and not necessarily according to the circumstances. We didn't have to be dragged into another wide, direct conflict with the Iranians at the moment, which would definitely have entailed full war with Hezbollah, while we're still pursuing what we're pursuing in Gaza and the release of the hostages from Gaza. So we had an opportunity to project our capabilities, to prove, I think, to everybody who was really looking and watching, that while the Iranians' numerous projectiles cannot penetrate our air defense, we could do this with a very surgical strike, damage an important asset. What I saw in the reporting, and I believe it is true, is a radar of a S-300 air defense battery, a Russian air defense battery. And I think this message is very clear to the Iranians. Israel is taking a risk that the Iranians may think that Israel did not respond more than that because we are deterred or afraid, or the Americans are not on our side. That could be true. If this is the case, they're miscalculating. I think the approval of the package last night in the Senate and the signing of President Biden proves yet again the strong, ironclad, as President Biden calls it, commitment of the United States to Israel's defense. It doesn't mean that the Americans were looking for an escalation in the Middle East. I think that the Americans are too worried about the implications of the use of force, but that's their calculus. On the Israeli side, I think the war cabinet managed to strike a good balance between the other issues. What we need to remember as it comes to Iran is that the ball that we need to keep our eyes on is the nuclear program of Iran. And when it gets to that, this is what we will need to decisively go after, because if Iran goes nuclear, what we've seen in April 13 would have been dramatically different, even if they won't use it. Just the ability of them to threaten to use it would have changed the calculus dramatically. Israel cannot get to that. I think everybody needs to understand that Israel cannot get to that point. Neither would the pragmatic Arab countries around us. And we need to remember what are our priorities as it comes to Iran, and not be diverted by other issues. The war in Gaza is big enough a distraction as it is. Having said all that, what we should expect in the north, I think Hezbollah would probably continue to check our borders. They're not interested in a war. If they were, it would already have opened, especially after uh, the fist fight with the Iranians in April. But they will continue, I think, to challenge. The Israeli government has a strong dilemma what to do about this. I think we would see more and more debates within the Israeli establishment, government, political echelons and figures, how we should proceed. If Israel will not go to war with Hezbollah at the moment, maybe the proper way is to define a time in which we state to everybody, Hezbollah included and everybody else, that our civilians are coming back to their homes, to rechange the calculus, because at the moment it's very easy for Hezbollah to keep firing at our towns because they're vacant and they can do a lot of damage to real estate with very few injured or casualties, which they know is what will trigger Israel to escalate. This balance isn't good for Israel. At the moment, we are still continuing, the IDF is still continuing to target them, I think, very effectively. The number of Hezbollah terrorists who are killed in this, not a war, right? But it has been waging for 5 months now, is higher than the number of Hezbollah terrorists we killed in the Second Lebanese War. The number of commanders that are hit, infrastructure. I think the IDF is gaining, I would say, tactical, important, but yet tactical gains in southern Lebanon, but this will not prevent Hezbollah from being able to aim at our communities. And this is not enough for us to bring back our civilians back to their homes and their towns. So this will be the dilemma that the Israeli government will face. We spoke about Gaza, we spoke about Iran, we spoke about Hezbollah. Talia mentioned the West Bank. I think we need to keep a very close eye, of course, on what's happening there. We need to acknowledge that Ramadan indeed ended without things getting too much out of control. I mean, clearly, Jerusalem did not become the battlefield that I think Hamas wanted and was aiming for. This says a lot about, first and foremost, the Israeli Arab community that refused to join this conflict. And I use every opportunity to praise them and to strengthen this understanding of the Israeli Arab community, that this is not a part of their ethos. This is not a part of their being, of their values. Atrocities carried out by Hamas, this is not something that they want to relate themselves with. It doesn't mean that their needs have been satisfied, but we did not see things erupt during Ramadan. I think that's very important. But we are seeing in West Bank is IDF very strongly, I think, going after Hamas cells and other extreme infrastructure that is all around. There's a lot of weapons in the West Bank. There has been a lot of weapons in the West Bank for a long time, and there is more now. You've heard and seen IDF operations to disrupt shipments of arms coming from Iran through Jordan into the West Bank, and it is clear that Iran is trying to fuse West Bank as well. This will be another front that I hope the IDF and the Shin Bet are able to maintain. We don't need this front to erupt. Hopefully, the West Bank will remain calmer, so that when eventually in the future time will come for a ceasefire and ability to start rebuilding and creating something new, we won't have another violent front ahead of us, and we'll be able to treat separately West Bank and Gaza. I think so will be important not only for the Israelis, but also for the Palestinians. So maybe I'll end with that and open it up for questions. Talia, back to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Hulata, for that briefing. I'll take it in the same order that you introduced the topics. So we'll start with Iran specifically. Of course, you mentioned that the number one issue that we should be thinking about is the nuclear issue, and of course, this is where the international community comes in. But if we take it down a notch to what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, do you think that we're done with the current tit for tat? We saw Israel striking against S-300 in Isfahan, and a couple of days before, obviously, was what was the strike that you had mentioned? How long do you think this will go on for? Do you think this is behind us for now, or what are your thoughts?
So I think this round, if we can call it this way, is behind us, especially because the Iranians chose to deny Israel's action, right? I mean, once they went public to their own people and to the international community saying that nothing happened, that they shot down 3 drones, and that was it. Whereas, of course, I think the audience knows that this isn't the case. The Iranians chose to put this behind them. This has happened before, right? I mean, Iran has a habit to deny things and actions and operations and things that happen inside of Iran for years, especially when they don't want to act. This has been, by the way, part of the covert nature of things. As long as Israel did not fully admit what we did, Iran had a deniability that would allow them to choose whether or not to act or not. Maybe if we hadn't bragged about killing the Iranian general in Damascus, which, by the way, I thought was an important mission. He was not there for vacation. He was there with the top IRGC officers planning how to expand the threat for Israel in the northern front vis-a-vis Hezbollah and other proxies. I thought that was a justified action. By the way, it was not a consulate, it was not an embassy, it was a building, a command post that they were using. Unfortunately, in a lot of the international media, they kept calling it a consulate or even an embassy, whereas that is not the case. Completely justified action, I think, by Israel, given what they were doing there. Maybe if Israel hadn't been so overt about our accountability for that attack, then April 13 would have been prevented because Iran wouldn't want it. But this wasn't the case. In any case, they did not respond to what we did on this airbase of theirs. This closes this round. I think that Iran might believe that this will have an effect on Israeli actions in Damascus or Syria in general and in Lebanon in the future. I hope they're not wrong about this. Israel must continue their efforts in the northern front. And if the IRGC will continue to plot there against us, then we need to target them. Again, this would have been my recommendation had I been National Security Advisor to this government as well. And I'm sure that this is the advice that they're getting from the IDF, from the security establishment, and the War Cabinet would probably follow that advice. And then we will see if Iran decides to continue in outrageous rounds of attack like they did in April 13, targeting civilians after their officers have been targeted in something that can be called war zone, because this is what they were doing and plotting. Their response was completely off the charts. Hence, Israel responded as well. So I think the future will be determined by the way the Iranians will decide to approach. At the moment they decided to close this, Israel will continue to operate, I'm sure. And if Iran will continue to be off the chart, then Israel will need to escalate as well. I think Israel has proven, at least for these stages, that we have escalation dominance. We have better capabilities, and we're not afraid to use them. But we're not looking for full escalation. We'll need to follow and see what happens.
Understood. Regarding the northern front itself, you posed, a very logical dilemma that there's kind of a chicken and egg scenario in terms of whether the evacuees can return home as long as their homes are being bombed, but then Hezbollah is able to continue bombing when nobody is there. How do we risk a situation in which, at the end of the day, many families won't end up returning home at all, and then we really have, kind of this abandoned periphery on our northern border?
Well, that would be very unfortunate if this is the case. Israelis cannot be in exile in their own country. This cannot happen. This is the responsibility of the government, of the IDF, to defend the civilians. This is what we failed to do on October 7, and we have to regain that. And I know that even though on April 13, we have been able to prove what Israel really is when we are prepared in defending our civilians, this has little effect on the feeling of the people of the north, and also, by the way, of the people of the south. They are not going back to their homes either, even though there are not many rockets I think there are more rockets on the communities in the north than there are rockets in the communities in the south this far along into the war with Gaza. Ultimately, this is the responsibility of the government to restore the trust of the people in the country so that they can go back to their homes. I think I might have said this in one of the previous briefings, if not in this one, then in another interview. I happen to think that it was a mistake to evacuate all of the people from the north when they started. My late grandfather lived in the north of Israel during the Independence War, and they knew that the women, the children will retreat from the communities, but the men will stay to fight, because this is what the Israeli ethos was for years. In times of conflict, there were times where our borders were war zones all across. In 48, could have been also in 67. It didn't happen because we took the preventive action before the attack. But in 48, I think the decision to evacuate everybody was a mistake. I think that the government should have been more thoughtful in the implication that, of course, there was chaos, everybody were in trauma. I think the government was very afraid that things will go rouge in the north the way they went in the south. But in hindsight, everything is easier. In any case, where we are, I think they need to strike a decision. And if we're not, and I don't think we should at the moment go into a full-fledged war with Lebanon, we need to finish what we have in Gaza, and hopefully the international community can start doing something about 1701 that was not respected, I think, for a day since it was approved almost 18 years ago. But we cannot continue this way. We need to create a new balance with Hezbollah to deliver the dilemma to them. I don't think they will fire on civilians in large quantities the way they do now, because they don't want a war just as much as we don't. But we'll need to be brave in this. Is the Israeli government capable of being brave and leading its people? We'll have to see, but I think that's important.
Okay, another question that came in on Iran, in terms of just the precedent that this last attack set. Israel has, of course, targeted senior IRGC members in the past, and of course, we all remember the assassination of Imad Munia and others in the past. But this is really the first time that we've experienced such a massive salvo on many parts of the country. Can we expect this to be the response now every time a senior member is assassinated, or even any other significant installation targeted in Syria or otherwise?
So I addressed that briefly. I'll emphasize 2 points. First of all, I hope not. I don't know. Right? It will be an Iranian decision. It is clear that since Imad Mornia was mentioned, Imad Mornia, I think that happened in 2007, I think, or 8, 7. It's been 17 years almost since that time. Iran has built its arsenal and improved it and expanded it a lot. I think since that time. I remember well the Iranian ballistic missile program in 2007. It wasn't even close to what it is now. So the capabilities they have are different. And by the way, Imad Mornia was a Hezbollah operative, not an Iranian. And everything else that was done on Iranians, and there have been, according to foreign press, many instances in which they were targeting of Iranian officials. As I said before, it was all part of a covert conflict between Israel and Iran. I think this might have been the first time that this was so overt in this regard, and maybe this tempted the Iranians or triggered the Iranians in a way that they thought they could not respond. The fact that they failed is important, because I'm sure that they understand that this will happen again, because the Israeli air defense is capable of shooting down more rounds of this. Iran has a lot of weapons, a lot of drones, a lot of ballistic missiles, a lot of cruise missiles. I think Israel knows the numbers quite well, so they can do this for many rounds, but they also cannot do this indefinitely. And I think this will be the balance, because every time, if they choose, unfortunately, to do this, and I hope they don't, but if they do, then Israel, of course, will increase what we do, because, of course, we only demonstrated what we can do now. And if we attack that S-300 radar undetected, that means we can target any point in Iran as we choose. Iran understands that. Israel is not looking for a direct conflict with Iran at the moment. Iran should understand that as well. So what I think we need to understand is that Israel will continue to defend itself. And if IRGC officers will be in Syria trying to expand the northern front against Israel, Israel will interdict. This is a defensive measure. Of course, it's an offensive, but the aim is to defend and to prevent them from increasing their hostility and attacks on us. Israel will continue to, if you want, actively defend itself. And if Iran chooses to escalate, then Israel will respond. And I think Israel will respond more effectively than what Iran can do. And this is this escalation dominance balance that I was talking about. I hope they don't tempt us. I hope they stop sending IRGC officers to expand the front in the north. But if they choose to, then they should expect Israel to attack.
Understood. Moving back to Gaza, a lot of analysts were saying immediately after Iran's attack on Israel and the fact that it was very obvious to everybody by that point, Iran's direct connection to at least the support of the attacks on October 7th, that there was now a window of opportunity for Israel to move forward with its maneuver in Rafah. And of course, time is passing. Do you think that now is the time to move forward with such an operation? How do you see that playing out specifically, you know, from where you're sitting in Washington in terms of the support that we might have from our strongest ally in the West?
Yeah. So first, as it comes to Israel, I think what we've seen, as I said in the beginning, I think the analysis in Israel is that we cannot have a hostage deal at the moment. Sinwar won't give it to us. We see, by the way, I haven't talked about this in the beginning of the briefing, and this wasn't asked. I hope this is because you all recognize that Israel is doing way more than it did initially on the humanitarian aid to the Gazans. Those of you who've heard me before, then you know for a fact, I've been saying this from the initial brief. The first brief I gave on JPC was, I think, 3 days, 4 days, Talia, after the war started. I think I said back then Israel needs to push a lot of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This should not be a bargaining part of the conflict. And I think what you see over the last 2-3 weeks since that very unfortunate, horrific strike on the World Kitchen, World Central Kitchen workers, unfortunately, a very unfortunate incident. You see a lot more. I think Israel should have done that before, but in any case, there is a lot more aid coming into Gaza. So given the fact that there is no hostage deal, and given the fact that there is a lot more humanitarian aid to the Gazans, I think there is an understanding also by the administration that Israel, there is not more that we can do, right? If they agree with our goals, which is to remove Hamas from ruling Gaza, to bring back the hostages, creating new conditions in Gaza, Israel is exhausting its means. And I think we should expect the administration to understand that and to back Israel as we move ahead also towards an operation in Rafah. Of course, the civilians, as I said, will need to be evacuated. And the program for that, I expect us all to start seeing in the motion. And let's see how this plays out. Will that change Sinwar's calculus? Maybe. I don't think so, but it might.
So while we were already on the topic of humanitarian issues, we have, of course, the downfall of UNRWA, which apparently is now back on the rise after Israel has allegedly failed to supply evidence about the direct involvement of its workers on October 7th. And we have a declaration from Germany saying that they will reinstate their support of UNRWA. What would be your recommendations at this point?
Well, first,
in order not to lose Europe in general.
Yeah. First of all, I have to say I'm not in touch with German officials or any other officials at the moment. I think that's a mistake mistaken move by Germany. There is ample evidence about UNRWA's workers' active participation in the atrocities in October 7, in the incitement before this, and I think also in aiding Hamas afterwards. I think that is very, very clear. I think the international community is unjustifiably looking for balance between Israel and Hamas, and that is, I think, should be pushed back and denounced strongly. I also want to use this opportunity to say that when Guterres, the chairman of the UN, not chairman, how do you say Mazkal in English? I'm sorry.
Secretary General.
Secretary General, thank you, Talia. The Secretary General of the UN, Guterres, when he decides, even though there is a UN committee specifically saying and proving that Hamas conducted gender violence on October 7, brutally raped, murdered, abducted women, and he declines to announce Hamas as an entity that is using gender violence just because it means that he will need to announce them as a terror organization, which they are. The fact that Secretary General Guterres refuses to do this must be pushed back, denounced very strongly. And for those of you who intend to quote me, please quote me on this. This cannot be allowed to happen. The UN cannot stand aside on brutality of this sort on the side of Hamas. They can criticize Israel for not doing everything in its powers for giving humanitarian aid. And when Israel needs to be attacked, it is, unfortunately, Israel's attacked way more than I think what is reasonable. But that's a different story. We cannot be blind to what Hamas did on October 7. We just cannot look away. This cannot be happening in 2024 in Europe in general. And I know exactly where Secretary General Guterres was raised and what he did in the past. He used to call himself a friend of Israel. We met him with Prime Ministers Bennett and with Prime Minister Lapid. I don't know what happened to him. That's a very wrong call. So you started with UNRWA. I ended with the UN, which is the house of UNRWA. Unfortunately, Israel cannot expect them to be sided with us when we deserve it. Unfortunately, that is the case.
Okay, you mentioned the IDF's actions in the West Bank at the moment, but there are, of course, still attacks going into the Green Line. We attack a larger attack was averted in Jerusalem, not because of intent, but by the fact that the semi-automatic weapon that terrorists had tried to use was flawed. Do you think we're going to be seeing those kinds of attacks on the rise as they were a few years ago, where they're coming in and even in different cities around the country?
So first of all, they've been on the rise for a long time, and I think the IDF and Shabak, the Shin Bet, have been effective in disrupting most of them, and we got lucky this time, and we might get lucky again, but it also might happen that we won't be lucky. Now, we had unfortunately successful terror acts in Jerusalem and the vicinity over the last months. I think it's already months ago. An attack in the tunnels in the south of Jerusalem with casualties, and of course they will try to do more. The mission of the IDF and Shin Bet at the moment is to keep the West Bank as calm as possible, to attack as many cells as possible, so that the infrastructure is dismantled, so that we have a chance to keep it calm in the day after Gaza. Will we be successful? I hope we are. Of course, the longer the war in Gaza extends, the more attempts, both in West Bank, by the way, also in the north. And we are playing with dice here. We're rolling them every day again. I hope that we will not suffer extreme casualties, because if we do, then we will need to escalate, and that will not be, I think, in either interest of the sides.
One journalist is asking, bringing us back to Iran, because why not?
My favorite topic, of course. They all know that.
Right. The strike against the S-300 radar. What is this telling Russia, other players in the region that might be directly connected to these weapons and otherwise?
Yeah. Well, I think the question already means that the message is delivered, because yes, S-300 is a Russian-made battery. Israel, I think this is the first time Israel attacks an S-300 battery. In Syria, for years, we refrained from doing so because of the code of disengagement we had with the Russians. I think the Russians are violating the code. I think the Russians are giving aid to Iran in magnitudes way from before. There is an axis that has been formed and unfortunately strengthened over the time since the war in Ukraine started. The Russians need the Iranians much more, and the Iranians get their dividend back from what they're doing with the Russians. This, of course, is not in the interest of Israel. It's not in the interest of the region. It's not in the interest of the West, of Europe, of the US. This is not good for anybody. And when Israel needs to stand up for it, we will do. The fact that we can attack an S-300 is a fact. Shouldn't come as a surprise to the Russians. Shouldn't come to the surprise to anybody. This will not be the barrier for Israeli response. What is the message for that from others buying weapons from Russia? That's for them to decide.
And another question is in terms of the timing itself. Israel had a nice amount of time, 9 hours, to prepare for the attack. Not just Israel, but of course the allies that participated, the U.S., Jordan, and so forth. Assuming that in future instances we'll have less time to prepare, is Israel able to defend itself in the same way?
So I think the short answer is yes. The reason for that is that Israel defenses against missiles coming into Israel is always on alert. Even in October 7, unfortunately, what everybody should understand is that the rockets did not cause the damage because the rockets were shut down, because our air defense is always alert. What wasn't alert is our ground defenses, and we failed there. Iran is so far away that when they fire a drone, it takes hours for it to reach Israel anyway. And the advance warning that we get from the coalition, from the Americans in Iraq, and everything they have gives us an advance warning. So the ability of Iran to have a surprise attack on Israel can only come from ballistic or cruise missiles. And again, the Israeli system should be on alert all the time to take that. It doesn't mean that Iran cannot surprise us. This is not foolproof systems, but I think that Iran should know that it will be difficult for them to surprise us from that far away. They can surprise us from the proxies. Unfortunately, that has been a bigger problem for Israel recently.
Well, we're almost out of time, but there are still a few last questions, and I want to make sure that we get as much as we can in the time that we have. One journalist is asking about the reports coming out of mass graves outside the Al Shifa hospital. Obviously, since the reports came out, we've seen the IDF denying that. If you have any other information on that, or if you're able to comment.
It will be a short answer because I think we should listen to the IDF spokesman. I think the IDF spokesman in general has a good track record of saying things that are all validated. I don't think that they've been wrong dramatically. They haven't failed in correcting themselves when they made mistakes. I think on this case, it's completely absurd accusation. Israel does not use mass graves. This is not part of what we do. We never do that. I think what was said there is that we dug out hostages close to Al Shifa, and that created this violation of the terrain. And I think we need to accept and embrace the IDF spokesman's responsiveness.
You mentioned a lot earlier in our conversation that specifically regarding the hostages, that the number of live hostages is probably becoming lower. We've seen obviously different reports coming out over the last few days. Reports saying that the numbers are lower than we thought, and then Hamas denying it. Do we have any indication of what could be closer to the truth?
I believe the IDF and the Shin Bet has. I don't want to open this up. This is indeed a problem, and as time passes by, there will be less and less. That is certain. Hamas is both killing them, and some of them are not getting treated well, and they're dying. And again, for a host of reasons, one of them is to get as many alive as possible. We should have a hostage deal as soon as possible.
Okay, and just one last topic that we've yet to touch, and that's obviously directly related to what's happening in Israel. That is, of course, the situation on campuses in North America, which seems to be getting out of control. And we've seen, various hearings on the matter, various academics being called up to explain themselves. How do you see this playing out, especially since we now understand the direct connection between many of the instigators on the campuses and other countries involved in terms of financing and otherwise? What are your thoughts on this?
I have to say that that is one of the things that worries me the most. I live in the US. I live in Washington. It's right around here. I've been to the Columbia campus. I studied in Harvard, so I know Harvard Yard very well. All those places have become places of incitement, of hatred, of racism against the Jews, and against Israel. And when I speak to people who protest, most of them, unfortunately, have no idea what they're talking about. They're just inflamed by the wave. Most of the people I talk to, and of course, this is well documented, when they chant from the river to the sea, they have no idea on which river they're talking about and on which seas are talking about. This is not the Mississippi River. Uh, um, and when they understand that if they want to free from the river to the sea all of the Jews, that means that they want to eradicate the state of Israel, the only homeland of the Jewish people, which is ours. We haven't colonized it. We have come home. And there were Jews here, or not here because I'm in DC, but where you are, in that piece of land in Jerusalem, where Talia is sitting, continuously for thousands of years. They don't know that. They don't know history. They're dragged by the waves of simplistic thinking and hatred, just thinking that if there is a war, it means that the oppressed must be right and the oppressor must be wrong at all times. Well, things are more complicated than that. Israel is facing this situation because Hamas not only started the war, they aim at eradicating all of us and killing us all if they had just the chance. And we are fighting for our lives. We may not fight the way that the Western world wants us to fight, and we definitely make mistakes, but we are fighting for our lives. And this message does not come across well enough. Israel is not good enough in explaining that. And I think that the ear of the liberal constituencies in the US, in Europe, isn't tuned for that. They just have forgotten a lot of their history and very simplistically looking at things at the moment. That's a big problem. I think that's a big problem for the US. I think that's a big problem for the countries of Europe. Because in this case, it's about us. But there are many things that those people can be I don't want to use the term brainwash because I think it's more complicated than that, but just carried in the wave of hatred against other things which are not related to Israel. Just so easy to mobilize the younger generations. That is a problem. Specifically on the campuses, I think the fact that the police forces have started to be active and to arrest those people is a good sign. The leadership of the universities need to give a very clear, direct message that they are not only against it, they're acting against it. I didn't like hearing Columbia University saying that they're going on hybrid lessons until the end of the semester. What does that mean? The Jews cannot go to universities anymore because pro-Palestinian protesters are violent and trying to bully them and hit them on the roads towards the campus. That is insane. This shouldn't happen in any circumstances, and there is no justification to that. And the fact that the war in Gaza has become justification to that is absurd, especially when we understand how all this started. There's a lot of work for, I think, the Western liberal world in reflecting on what they allow to happen under their hands. This is on us this time. It won't be on us the next time. And hopefully we can learn from this and grow. This is important for all of us.
Right, but it's not just as you mentioned, of course, it's the younger generations, and you are calling on the leaderships of the universities to speak out, but they're not, and they're being invited to different platforms and being asked to come out in very clear rejection of these phenomena, but they're not. So how do we overcome that?
So, the head CEO of the FDD, Mark Dubovitz, has just tweeted a few days ago a tweet that gone viral, basically saying that they should teach in business schools as a case study how easily it is for the leadership of the universities to wipe out their own value so easily over unjustified reasoning, just because they're afraid to do what is right. They're afraid to say what is true and to call black and white. I didn't mean this in the color of the skin. I meant it in what is right and what is wrong. and they refrain to do that. That is not what we expect from the leading academia, the leading liberal voices that are teaching the younger students. I hope they get around to it. Several university presidents have already resigned. I'm not calling for resignations of others. I'm calling for them to stand up for what is right, to use their campuses to educate people for critical thinking, for understanding of complexities, for understanding that there isn't just one justice and just one right narrative. Things are complex. And in our situation, it is as complex as it gets.
Very clear. Dr. Eyal Hulata, a former national security advisor and head of the Security Council in Israel, today senior fellow at the FDD in Washington. Thank you so much for your time, as always.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay. And thank you to my colleague, Jonathan Beck, for facilitating this call. Chag Sameach, everybody.